Welcome to the 2023 Annual Breast Cancer Summit. I'm Kristen Thorne, an investigative reporter with Eyewitness News. I've been hosting this event for the last 8 years, which is wonderful. And I'd love to have everybody's attention because for the first time, my being at this event is converging with my journalistic duties. So, a few months ago, I got an email from a viewer who said, I think you need to look into nerve grafting coverage for breast reconstruction. And so I'm reading through this email, and the woman is telling me that her mother died of breast cancer, her aunt died of breast cancer. She is 36 years old, she has 2 children, and she's gonna wants a double preventative mastectomy. But her insurance would not cover the nerve grafting, which is the sensation which allows you, to keep sensation in your breast after a mastectomy. So immediately I know who I need to contact. You don't want to reach out to somebody. This is an investigative tip. We don't reach out to people, especially with something this emotional, before we do our research, right? So I want to see, is she accurate? Is this something that insurance companies aren't covering? So I know exactly who I need to contact after 8 years is Long Island Plastic Surgical Group. So I reach out to Janine. She gets me in touch with Dr. Adana. And he confirmed, we got on a phone call, he said, absolutely, this is what we're dealing with right now. This is a big issue for us. We have constantly insurance companies. There are, of course, some that do cover, but patients do have to fight for it. They have to appeal it. And so I contacted the viewer. We did an interview with her. It's very sad that she postponed this double preventative mastectomy so she could get insurance that would perhaps cover it. We reached out to the insurance company. These procedures are considered experimental and not medically necessary. To be fair, in the research I've done, nerve grafting as a whole for some procedures, removal of prostate, for example, it's also considered experimental, not medically necessary. But we know that nerve grafting is done for many other procedures. So either way, if anyone here today, we are going to be interviewing Dr. Adana after this. This will also be on Channel 7 tonight. If anyone here has experienced this or feels strongly about it or wishes that they had this as an option and can share that experience with me and wants to, I would love for you to find me during one of the breaks. We can get you in for an interview. It takes 5 minutes. You can share your story, but I would love, it dawned on me this morning, I'm here. If anybody wants to talk about it, please come and find me. Our program today supports breast cancer awareness, education, advanced medical practices, procedures, and technologies, bringing together industry, hospital, clinical leaders, and the breast cancer community. This yearly event provides a space for experts in the field to discuss how they are navigating the ever-evolving world of healthcare as it pertains to the fight against breast cancer. And again, nerve grafting, as Dr. Adana explained to me, is really on the forefront. It's kind of the issue right now in this sphere, is one of the many issues, is trying to figure out how to make this standard of care. Breast reconstruction is an option for every woman undergoing breast cancer removal surgery. Breast Reconstruction Awareness Day, or BRA Day, is an initiative designed to promote education, awareness, and access regarding post-mastectomy breast reconstruction. This initiative is a collaborative effort between the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, the Plastic Surgery Foundation, and plastic surgeons specializing in breast surgery. BRA Day occurs annually on the 3rd Wednesday of October. This year, it falls on today, October 18th. So we are so happy to be here today, that you could be here with us today on BRA Day. We will have a dedicated panel devoted to this topic with the physicians of the New York Plastic Surgical Group. Our program today will also explore new therapies for advanced breast cancer, risk factors that affect cancer, and the importance of physical therapy before and after surgery. We are thrilled to have 2 amazing survivors share their personal stories and to have keynote speaker Joe Bauer of the Today Show join us. Joy Bauer of the Today Show. Joy is one of the nation's leading health authorities and will educate us on food remedies to fight breast cancer. This exciting lineup of experts and real people sharing their stories is sure to both educate and inspire you. Today, you can be your own investigative reporter with access to some of the most credible and authoritative sources, and I can assure you no one will run away from you here like they do when I show up on their doorstep sometimes. Through today's program, we encourage you to ask questions, network, and take advantage of community and health resources that may be of use to you. We know there is a wealth of information available online, but by being here today, patients, survivors, and family members can obtain both authoritative information and interaction with experts. We will be doing a Q&A after our clinical discussion. However, if you're unable to get your question answered, or if you have general feedback you'd like to share with the team here, you can be look out for your email. You'll be getting a post-event survey there. The presentations you're about to see will be filmed, and an edited version of today's program will be made available to you on the event website, breastcancersummit.com. As I mentioned, my photographer will be here in a little bit. We will be airing something on Eyewitness News tonight between 4 and 6:30 p.m., so you can keep a lookout for that as well. Help us spread the word when posting to social media. Please be sure to event the hashtag Breast Cancer Summit, and please tag at NY Plastic Surgical. Lastly, as you know, we have some amazing vendors here. Please spend some time visiting them during the breaks. You will also find a QR code on the back of today's program that will take you to the event website where all these breast cancer education and support resources are listed. At this time, I'd like to invite up Dr. Tommaso Adana to the podium. Dr. Adana is the president of New York Plastic Surgical Group, the founding organization of this event.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, that's a great good morning, everyone. I don't want to lose that opportunity. Someone responds with a good morning. You don't want to miss that window. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to congratulate and thank Kristen Thorne. Kristen's an Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter for WABC, Channel 7, Eyewitness News in New York. Kristen has dedicated her career to giving a voice to the voiceless. As an investigative reporter, she has exposed corruption within local government, failure of public policies, and knocked on the doors of potential killers. I'd like to hear some of those stories later on if we can chat after. It'd be great. Her goal is to help people and make the world a better place through the power of her journalistic voice. She's here with us today, donating her time. A heartfelt thank you to Kristen. Please let's give her a round of applause. With all that's going on in the world right now, very much of it not being good, from our end, today, the goal is to focus on health and wellness through education. The New York Plastic Surgical Group is proud to host and produce this annual event. This will be our 11th annual Breast Cancer Summit. Last year at this event, we announced our practice's name change. We're also proud to share that this year marks our 75th anniversary as a practice. Our rebranding from the Long Island Plastic Surgical Group to the New York Plastic Surgical Group is designed to build on our history of excellence while still acknowledging the expansion of our business beyond Long Island. We have 13 locations in the tri-state area. While our name has changed, our commitment to the field of plastic surgery and those within it that we serve has not. As always, providing comprehensive care is our chief priority. We look forward to continuing to offer patients the most advanced reconstructive and cosmetic options, as well as providing educational opportunities within the communities we serve, such as this, our annual Breast Cancer Summit. While we serve the greater New York metropolitan area on a daily basis, our goal is to make an impact on a much larger scale. At this time, I'd like to introduce my partner and research board member, Dr. Thomas Davenport. Tom's going to share some history and insights into our partnership with Research International. Thanks, Tom.
So while we are expanding our footprint across the New York area, we've also, for many years, been expanding our footprint across the world through our relationship with Reconstructive Surgery International, Research International. We've been involved with research now for 8 years. I've been involved for 23 years, since 2001. We help with research to provide education and surgeries across the world. I'm proud to address this partnership as they provide surgery to patients across the world with lack of access, to patients suffering from burn contractures, lips, palates, traffic accidents, and now we're very excited to add, through programs with research, breast reconstruction. It says right here, wait for applause. Stop talking. So I had to do that. So, can we have the slide, please? One of our first partners is Dr. Trung Hao, who provides the only breast reconstruction in central Vietnam. What I always say is that with research, we provide surgeries, but more importantly, we provide hope. And having been on these trips with many members of New York Plastic Surgical Group, Tomasa was worried I was going to say Long Island, we are able to provide hope to patients who had no hope for cleft palate surgery, burn reconstruction, and now breast reconstruction. I'd also like to introduce Claire Lachance, the CEO of Reconstructive Surgery International. She's come all the way from San Francisco to be here today. While breast reconstruction is scarce in Vietnam, it's also scarce around the world. Currently in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, there are almost no plastic surgeons providing breast reconstruction. And through research's partnership with Partners in Health and University Global Health Equity in Rwanda, they're setting up a breast reconstruction fellowship where hopefully New York Plastic Surgical Group will participate. Here in the United States, we are lucky enough to have access. And through the help of research and hopefully our partnership with research in these areas, we'll help to expand our footprint, not only to the New York area, but throughout the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. It's tough to follow Tom. If anyone that knows Tom, he's an excellent orator, gives a specific speech or perfect speech in any setting, so not easy to follow him. We have a fantastic lineup of presentations today for this morning. We hope that you leave with information and resources that inspire you and best guide your treatment in breast cancer care, whether you're here as a survivor, supporter, or caregiver. That being said, let's start the program. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker to the stage this morning, Dr. Douglas Marks. Dr. Marks, I paused a bit long. Dr. Marks will be educating us on new therapies for advanced breast cancer. Thanks, Doug.
All right, so thanks everyone for this invitation. I'm honored to be here. I'll try to take us from research to research. Again, I have many colleagues in the room and also some patients, and I'm really honored to have been invited. So my talk today will be mostly on breast cancer clinical trials, and as Tommaso mentioned, I will focus on advanced breast cancer, which is a very important part of caring for breast cancer patients. So as mentioned, I'm from NYU Perlmutter Cancer Center, and I'm the director of the clinical trials office there, as well as a breast medical oncologist and see patients in Manhattan and Long Island. Some disclosures before my talk. I'm a consultant for a number of pharmaceutical companies providing insight on trial design, as well as I have research that's paid for by several pharmaceutical companies as well. And so please note that when I'm giving these slides, that these are my disclosures. Today, I'd like to cover a few salient points. I want to discuss breast cancer research and the importance of improved therapies, the role of clinical trials in determining the future of breast cancer care, promising new investigational therapies, and the future directions that I see as most promising for our field. To take a step back, breast cancer. While the majority of women with breast cancer we know are diagnosed early and with curable disease, breast cancer is still the second leading cause of cancer-related mortality in women in the United States, the leading cause globally, and the highest cause of cancer mortality rate in Black women. In the US, approximately 290,000 new cases of breast cancer will be diagnosed in the coming year, and about 50,000 women will die of the disease. And while the median age of breast cancer is 62 at diagnosis, 20% of women will be diagnosed younger than 50, and 5% will be diagnosed under 40. So this really is a problem that is pervasive, it is common, and even though we have excellent treatments, we need new and more effective treatments. Breast cancer treatment is complicated. It's not one disease group, and that's why I find it particularly important and interesting. Breast cancer subtypes are determined on a molecular basis, and I think this diagram just begins to depict how I think of patients when I see them, from the way that their tumor looks under the microscope to the way that their genes behave in their tumor and to the drugs that I think will be effective for them. So very important, I think, in the challenges that we have ahead, we have to determine the optimal treatment for early stage breast cancer and make sure that we are not treating patients too aggressively. As we develop new therapies that are more effective, we can scale back, but also expanding therapies for advanced breast cancer. These are patients whose breast cancer has left the breast and poses like a life-limiting comorbidity. That's where I'll be focusing mostly today. So specifically, I'd like to talk about estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. This is the most common breast cancer. This is also the breast cancer that has the best prognosis, but because of the frequency of diagnosis, it is also responsible for the most breast cancer-related deaths every year. And survival has improved with the development of drugs called CDK inhibitors. You probably see these all the time in the news and on the advertisements, Verzenio, Kisqali, and palbociclib and Ibrance. And these have been a home run coming out in 2016. But we really do need therapies after our initial treatment with these agents to help prolong the period of time that patients can be treated with non-chemotherapy treatments with this type of disease, prolonging the period that we can take advantage of their estrogen dependence before moving on to chemotherapy. Recently, a lot of attention has been paid to changes in the estrogen receptor called ESR1 mutations. These mutations occur in where the estrogen binds the receptor, which triggers the growth of the cell to be inappropriate. And this has been a major advance in the field. When you look at where these mutations occur, they cluster around the binding area, and there are some that are particularly prevalent. Below I show like a histogram of different mutations, and you can see that there are some mutations that are particularly common and as a result have become the source of a lot of investigation and targeted therapies. The second of which was recently approved, elacestrant. This is a new drug that is specifically and preferentially efficacious in women who have, or men, who have a mutation in the ESR1 mutation as a part of their resistance strategy to that upfront therapy that I initially described. And while we are always looking for improved treatments, there is a clear distinction of a group of patients here for whom benefit initially that can have a long continued benefit when elacestrant is added on disease progression. So these are what are called Kaplan-Meier curves, and you can see that the top line represents the women that were treated with this drug over standard of care treatment. However, what else, what are the next steps? If you look back at these curves, there is still a steep decline in patients at the very early part of their treatment that do not respond. How do we figure out what to treat these patients with? So as I mentioned, these CDK inhibitors that were sort of a landmark breakthrough in 2016, there are a number of new ones in development which are very promising, which work downstream of the CDK4/6 target, as well as drugs that target a pathway that runs alongside that pathway called the PI3K pathway. Capivasertib is a drug that's currently under review by the FDA, which has the potential to be practice-changing. It's a drug that targets the PI3K pathway and is a related pathway to a drug that we have called alpelisib or Piqray. But what is particularly exciting about this drug is it's further down in the pathway, so it has the potential to have a more suppressive role on a growth pathway. There was a study called Capitello 291, which was presented recently, which showed that when this drug was added to fulvestrant, patients lived longer without disease progression. So these are different graphs that we look at where we compare and make sure that the study appropriately evaluates a drug. You see two columns here. There's a group of patients that received the study drug and a group that received the placebo. Of course, no one just got placebo. Everyone got standard treatment plus a placebo or standard treatment plus this new drug. And we looked at, the study group looked at overall survival as well as progression-free survival and found that that the drug was tolerable as compared to prior drugs. This is what's called a side effect plot, where you can see that compared to the patients that received the placebo and standard of care together group, there were comparable side effect profiles. But there was a quite significant improvement with what's called a hazard ratio of 0.6, which means that at every time point there was a 40% reduction in the patients of having progression compared to the patients that received, comparing the patients that received this drug with those that did not. And what looks different about this curve is that you see that the split in the curve happens much earlier. You can see that there are patients that benefit very early from this drug, and there's not that steep decline that I showed on the first set of Kaplan-Meier curves. So this is a very promising agent, and it worked across disease subtypes. This is called a forest plot, where we look specifically at different groups and see, is there one group that's benefiting and one that is not? All the dots to the left indicate that the group that received this combination therapy did better than the group that did not. And this is now pending FDA review. Moving on from this exciting drug, so this is the PI3K pathway, which we will learn more and more about, but I believe will be the focus of a number of drugs that will be promising for our patients, all of which are non-chemotherapy drugs that will delay again the time needed before initiating chemo. The other pathway is the CDK pathway, which they do intersect, but here on this graph I show the 3 currently approved CDK inhibitors, ribociclib, abemaciclib, and palbociclib. But there, you can see that there are other points on this cyclin pathway called the CDK inhibition targets that can be addressed. And so for the remaining few minutes, I'll go and discuss these drugs. So this is by no means a comprehensive list. I'm always nervous when I put a slide like this together that a new drug will be appropriate by the time I give the talk. But I will highlight CDK2 inhibitors, CDK4 inhibitors, and CDK7 inhibitors. So once the patient progresses and they are resistant to CDK4/6, they can develop a number of resistance strategies, and some of them just include increasing the protein level of those proteins. Others include losing the downstream targets and using proteins further in the pathway. So CDK4 and CDK6, this has been the target so far. These are the target of the 3 FDA-approved drugs. However, it does appear that CDK4 is more that isoform, that protein is more relevant for cancer growth than CDK6. By contrast, CDK6 is associated with a fair amount of the toxicity, particularly the neutropenia that we see with these drugs. And as a result, it limits for 2 of the agents whether the drug can be continuously given. So not surprisingly, the next question would be, can the fraction of activity between these isoforms be adjusted, or can you develop a drug that selectively targets CDK4? So recently presented earlier this year at ASCO was the preliminary data from a Pfizer study looking at CDK4 selective inhibition. And as expected, without the CDK6 inhibition, there was much less neutropenia and also the opportunity to continuously dose. And also, quite impressively, in my opinion, this is called a waterfall plot, where each patient represents a bar. So each patient in this that was given the drug represents a bar, and every bar that goes down below the line of the median represents tumor shrinkage. And all of these patients had previously received CDK4/6 inhibitors. Some of them had received chemotherapy. So these are previously treated patients who are progressing. Yet despite this, the majority of the patients had at least stable disease on treatment, with some of them having pretty significant responses, with at least 30% shrinkage in 30% of patients and disease stability for a prolonged period in almost 60%. And this is with single agent, meaning this drug given alone. So I'm very, I look forward to seeing that when this drug is combined with the other number of drugs that we expect would pair well with it. These are a number of different biocorollaries that they looked at, where they looked specifically at the cells in the blood and the tumor cells, DNA in the blood, and showed a marked suppression when giving this additional agent. Moving on the pathway, CDK2 inhibitors. These represent the sort of common final pathway as the cell divides. We have one of these protocols at Long Island and in the city, and it's I think we're the leading accruer, or one of the leading accruers for this study. So this drug had data presented in June of this year, demonstrating that in heavily pretreated patients, all of whom had received prior treatments with drugs that were upstream of this drug, that there was almost a 50% disease control rate, as well as approximately 30% patient responder rate. So also quite impressive. And there's another agent from Pfizer and another company that are also demonstrating activity for this drug. These are as single agents. So again, I think that in patients seeing these responses that have been through a lot of treatment, it's very exciting, and these will be all moving forward with various combinations of endocrine therapies. And the last I'll talk about is CDK7 inhibition, perhaps the newest on the field. I include here because the side effect profile is a little bit different for these agents, which is not unexpected as these are new. We should be looking carefully at side effects. But CDK7 is important in many parts of the pathway and is an appealing drug target. And in this group of patients that were presented also earlier this year, there was about a 25% disease control rate with this agent. So all these percentages compare favorably with chemotherapy, where response rates can be around 20% to 30%, but here we are giving single agent drugs that are significantly less toxic that would be expected to improve when given in combination. So here are some thoughts that I'll end with. I've talked about a number of different drugs, and I think they all beg the question is how to combine them. Can we combine these CDK4 inhibitors, which are less toxic on the blood cells, with drugs that are CDK2 inhibitors, which are downstream of that drug? Can we combine drugs that have and adjust their dosing to try to improve tolerability and do multiple targets all along the pathway with a triple inhibition? And then how can we combine these with immunotherapies, antibody drug conjugates, PI3K inhibitors, including the drug that I mentioned called capivasertib, which is an AKT inhibitor, PARP inhibitors. So one thing I will say about this field is that it is extremely exciting, and we should always be pushing for the next best option for our patients. And even though the cure rate from breast cancer has markedly improved, we still have a ways to go, and we shouldn't settle for anything but the best. With that, I do have to head out pretty shortly after this, but I'm including my email at the end, and I would welcome any questions that come up afterwards. For those who are in the room, my patients, they know I have a clinic on Wednesday, but I'm happy to take anything. Oh, sure. Yes, any questions? Sure.
Are the research trials that you're talking about accessible to anybody, or only through? How do people access the research trials that you're talking about?
Yeah, good question. So the question just, how do you get access to a clinical trial? I think the first point person should be your oncologist, because these trials appropriately are designed for subgroups of patients. Very rarely now do we have these all-comer trials for anybody, and that's because we want to maximize the probability that the patient is enrolling on a trial that's going to work for them. I presented no data from any placebo trials where patients just got placebos. All of these are trials that are designed to treat the patient. And so at our site, we have 50 plus active clinical trials in Mineola, hundreds in Manhattan. And when you meet with your oncologist, if a clinical trial hasn't been mentioned, I would bring it up. We have trials that are about de-escalating when patients have excellent prognosis and escalating when patients have poorer prognosis, to try to personalize the treatment to the patient.
Any other questions? No? All right.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Chang? You're up.
I was waiting to be called up, so. Thank you, Dr. Marks, for sharing these incredible treatment advances with us. And I didn't tell you, but I was admiring your suede jacket. Oh, he has it in his hand. Everyone check it out it's chef's kiss. In all seriousness, hi, I'm Dr. Jerry Chang. I am a board-certified plastic surgeon and partner at Long Island, just kidding, Tommaso. New York Plastic Surgical Group. Thank you. I am honored to introduce our next speaker, my patient, Norris Matherson. Norris will be sharing her own personal journey with breast cancer. In August of 2018, Norris was diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer. After a double mastectomy, over 7 months of chemotherapy, and several reconstructive surgeries, she is now thriving. Norris describes herself as a tough cookie. I agree, she never complained with any surgeries. She just said, let's do it, Dr. Chang. She's a strong, determined person who's not easily defeated, clearly. She works as a client strategist director with PricewaterhouseCoopers, a mouthful. Norris is a leader, problem solver, career coach, motivator, and agent of change. She is also a wife and proud mother of 3 adult children who I believe are all here two children who I believe are here today. Please join me in welcoming Norris.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Good morning, everyone. August 2018, I had just returned from a vacation cruise with my family. I was still on cloud 9 from the experience of exploring the beauty of Germany and Norway. My biannual mammogram and sonogram was scheduled for 2 days after my return. Fighting jet lag, you know how that is, I kept my appointment. So routine for me, I didn't even blink at hearing, we need to send you for a biopsy of both breasts. On a warm, sunny afternoon in early September 2018, after experiencing over 10 years of countless screenings, biopsies, and lumpectomies, I finally heard those words. We found triple-negative breast cancer. For years, I had been so used to going alone to my post-mammogram, sonogram, biopsy appointments for results. First thing that came to mind was, maybe I shouldn't have come here by myself today. While my doctor began explaining the available treatment options, I wondered what would come next. Subconsciously, I knew that given my history, I may eventually hear this diagnosis. However, I still wasn't ready. Who could be? For so many years, I participated in walks to support the fight for a cure. Now, I was on the other side of that walk. It would be my name on stickers that read, I walk for Norris. It felt like seconds went by between hearing the news and me choosing life. When I met with the patient coordinator to organize my appointments and begin the process of navigating this new, uncharted journey, she handed me an accordion folder with tabs already labeled. The one that immediately jumped out at me said, survivorship. What followed next was an overwhelming sense of peace and calm. I was instantly encouraged and steadfastly moved forward with focusing on my treatment plan. With the invaluable support of my family and friends, some who are here today, and the amazingness of my entire healthcare team, I survived a double mastectomy, over 7 months of chemo, and countless reconstructive surgeries. At my first reconstruction consultation, only days after hearing my diagnosis, I immediately knew that I was in great hands. Dr. Jerry Chang carefully presented my options, and together we decided on a plan forward. It was not a quick process. However, during each stage, I walked away extremely satisfied and waiting with anticipation for the next step and the finished product. And I'll just stop here for a second. My mom, who's one of my greatest supporters, she went to almost every appointment with me. And I'll never forget, one of my favorite memories is when I was finished with my expanding, and Dr. Chang said, "So, what do you think? Do you like it?" And I was like, "Yes." And then he says, "You know, we can go bigger." And then you hear my mom said, "No!" I'm extremely pleased with the results and outcome. Dr. Chang is simply amazing. A big thank you to the New York Plastic Surgical Group, Dr. Chang and his wonderful staff, who all epitomize utmost care and professionalism. Thank you all for helping me to feel whole again after the trauma of losing my breasts. You will always remain a positive chapter of my breast cancer journey. I survived, and now I thrive. Today, life means something far different than it did pre-diagnosis. As much as it is within my power, I work on avoiding or minimizing stress, and I focus on living a balanced life with good food and regular exercise. 2 years ago, I joined the Empire Dragons NYC Breast Cancer Dragon Boat team, New York City's first and only breast cancer survivor team. A world, national, and regional award-winning team, and I'll just stop here and say we are third in the world in the breast cancer division. We are second nationally in the breast cancer division, and this past September, we competed and we came out #1 in the region. It's an award-winning team comprised of members from throughout the tri-state area. In addition, we are one of over 200 breast cancer survivor teams worldwide that serve to promote the sport of dragon boating as a part of a healthy lifestyle and provide unique support for those fighting cancer. Empire is also an all-cancer team dedicated to empowering women to survive and thrive beyond cancer. We work to improve the environment in which we all live, as well as promoting exercise and nutrition as a means toward a healthy and fulfilling life. It is a place where I am able to supportively connect with other warriors and survivors as we teach each other spirit, strength, and success. We are literally all in the same boat. I begin each day thankful that back in August 2018, I fought through traveling fatigue and did not skip my scheduled screening. I start each day remembering that I'm grateful to belong to the strong and powerful community and supporters of breast cancer survivors. You don't have to be fearless. Doing it afraid is just as brave. Thank you.
I love that, Norris. You don't have to be fearless. It's really powerful. About 85% of breast cancers occur in women with no family history of breast cancer. In fact, we often hear of people developing cancer with no family history at all. Up next, we have Dr. Joshua Harris of New York Cancer and Blood Specialists. Dr. Harris will be speaking about risk factors that affect cancer.
So if anything, I must commend Norris. I mean, what a fantastic story, and I think that, she deserves another round because that was fantastic. Now, The one thing that really struck out to me is that you were so dedicated in going to all of your annual mammos, and I think, needless to say, how important that is for patients today. I have the privilege of, I trained at Winthrop, so a lot of the colleagues here that we end up seeing, now NYU, sorry about that. But it's been really fascinating, and having left training and now working within the community, I think it's very important to emphasize not only some of the risk factors that we'll talk about today, but also the importance of making sure that we do the simple and straightforward things. I commonly refer this to my patients as the low-hanging fruit. There's some things that we don't have control over, but if we do have control over doing some degree of surveillance or some type of lead time from that standpoint, I emphasize it, and whether I'm seeing a patient for anemia or whatever diagnosis, I'll always make sure to refer patients to make sure that they go for the annual screening, so much so that some patients get really, really annoyed with my requests. So if anything, we went through this on a couple of different slides previously where we emphasized the overall relevance of breast cancer today. This is a slide that's been commonly used just to kind of demonstrate the overwhelming prevalence of breast cancer and the overall incidence. So if you look, if anything, breast cancer has been up to about 30% of the new diagnoses of cancer annually. And when you look at that, it's the leading cause. When you look at overall mortality, it's the second leading mortality of cancer-related deaths in females, and because of that, this is all the more reason, and Dr. Marks did a fantastic recapping on patients that have metastatic disease and how some of the new and novel approaches and hormonal therapies really change our approach and personalize our approach. But I think what's more salient, especially given the climate of coming out of a pandemic, is being mindful that some of these things we do have control over. I've had countless patients that unfortunately between the pandemic from 2020 to about 2021, that we ended up finding diseases on the back end, and we're dealing with much more advanced disease because of that. So I think that for every patient here, as every person here, the family, friends, and relatives, just to emphasize the importance of going for screening because we do have control over these things. So when we start looking at the overall incidence and trend, you can kind of, this is some data that was presented somewhere back in 2022 or so, and you can kind of see that there's been a steady overall relative incline in incidence from that standpoint among breast cancers, and it supersedes a lot of the other diagnoses of solid tumor malignancies. I'm recapping as well some of the data from Dr. Marks, where we're looking at close to 280,000 women being diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. And I think what's more important is to look at the overall lifetime risk. When you're talking about 1 in 8 females, I mean, for me, that goes back, and I look at all of my colleagues, friends, and when we go out on Friday nights, 1 in 8, that's a lot, when you look at that in one's life. So for that reason alone, I'm the knowing friend, colleague, or so that I will physically say, I'll bring you myself to get your mammogram just to make sure. But the other incidence that seems quite striking is that even up until the age of 49, there's a relative risk of breast cancer. And we see this trend not only with breast cancer, but we're seeing it in a lot of different malignancies where we're seeing younger and younger patients being diagnosed with cancer. I've seen this in some of the colon cancer data, as well as also seeing it within some of the hepatobiliary malignancies. And as of right now, we don't really have a clear insight as far as the rationale for why that is taking place. When you start looking at it, it's also important just to look at ethnicity. Race seems to be some divide where, oh, perfect. Now I feel, all right, excellent. All right, perfect, sorry about that, I'm gonna go back. Ethnicity also seems to be somewhere where we also have to be mindful of it, where the overall incidence of breast cancer, whether advanced, localized, regionally advanced, these are diseases that we're seeing, and it kind of pervades throughout the community, whether black, white, yellow, brown. It's very prevalent from that standpoint, and we just have to be mindful. There are some disparities, and we'll go through that a little bit later, and that is a part of what we'll talk about, but it's important to recognize that the biology from everyone, we're all different, and I think Dr. Marks hit a nail on its head when he emphasized the importance of understanding how each patient is unique. Our treatment plan is very different.
I may see a patient with breast cancer that I opt to use a CD4K6 for one patient, and I may not use that same CD4K6 for another patient, and it's entirely unique. Now that we have some of the more advanced and sophisticated data where we're looking at some of the molecular and some of the signatures that really uniquely define that individualized patient, I think that our outcomes have definitely followed in suit. But I think it's important to emphasize that we are different from that standpoint, and when you look at clinical trials or so, in some cases we don't have the same degree of representation of every single ethnicity to really depict the same type of data, and it's important not only to have clinical trials, but also make them accessible for everyone from that standpoint. So it's important, just looking at some of the data, this is a similar depiction where you look at the overall trends of breast cancer within ethnicity from that standpoint. That if you look at both African Americans or black and white, there's a similar incidence with time, and we've seen that. But when you look at the slide on the right, you see that the overall mortality, there seems to be a big discordance between the two, and with time, the gap seems to be getting a little bit wider and wider. Now, some of us may also emphasize the importance of understanding the biology of the disease, and we see that commonly also with prostate cancer, that the biology is very different, and it's important to keep that at the forefront of our decision making. So some of the risk-adapted approaches that Dr. Marks was talking about or speaking about is very, very important for us to be mindful of in taking care of patients. So this also looks at, when you talk about breast cancer and different tumor types, if anything, you can see that there's a disproportionately larger number of patients that have either triple negative disease, so the 21% that's in the second column among African American or black females. And because of that, it does become a bit of a difficult challenge because the treatment that we have is simply limited to chemotherapy and systemic treatment. And with some of the newer advances now, we can use immunotherapy in some of these patients in the neoadjuvant and adjuvant or perioperative setting, which has made a phenomenal change in how we take care of patients. So the reason I put this up is because when you look at everyone, you look at African Americans, and I focused on a little bit of that because of triple negative breast, and I have a little bit of passion about taking care of. So I work in an underserved community as well as some other offices as well. And I think it's important to recognize that not everyone is the same when we cohort some of the smaller populations in some of the clinical trial settings where they mention African Americans. There's African Caribbean, there's Western African, East African, and because of that the biology is very different from there. It's important just to be mindful. So the highest incidence of triple negative breast cancer we find in African Americans here within the U.S. as well as in West African descent, and you find a slightly lower incidence of triple negative breast cancer in Caribbean population. So it's important. So the most important thing for us to somewhat also be mindful of is having access to care. So I'm at New York Cancer and Blood Specialists, and a lot of the passion that really drove me to joining to a group such as mine is that we prioritize going to some communities where there has not been a lot of access to care. And having grown up in Brownsville and the inner city, you realize and recognize that there are some barriers or ways in which some of the outcomes are somewhat not at the same degree. So access to care is very important for patients, and because of that, I think it's important to emphasize a little bit of that. And when we talk about some of these risk factors, not only the hormonal, which I'll get into a little bit, but because I think it's very important to emphasize that, we have a lot of different variables. So we look at systemic and structural determinants of health, as well as social determinants of health. Now this depiction, I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this before. This is actually, I stole it, I'll admit. It's from the maternal fetal mortality index, and it kind of follows the same trend. So I go to a few of these meetings and I see the same depiction, and when I looked at it, I said, I have very similar barriers that I have to deal with when I take care of patients. So when you look at some of the systemic and structural determinants between sexism, ageism, religious bias or so, those are some inherent things that obviously some things that we just need to be conscientious of. But then you also look at some of the social determinants of health. So that could be socioeconomic status, educational, finance, resources, social support, and I must commend Matherson's family because it sounded his mom was right there all along the way, and that's phenomenal. And it's important to have all of these resources being in place and having access to these, because that's the way that we can get these, we can utilize some of these novel therapies and have the outcomes such that we're able to really control the overall incidence, as well as, I think more so, decrease the overall risk of mortality of cancer-related deaths. And none other than, this was data that was just recently published last year or so. And this is a clear depiction of what happens when you actually not only look at caring for patients of different backgrounds, but also going into communities and going for what's called Medicaid expansion, or allowing patients that have some of these inherent social biases, bringing them to a community, and you look at the outcomes from that standpoint. So this was a study where they actually developed clinics in communities down south, and they wanted to see for patients that had de novo metastatic advanced disease, what were the outcomes? They followed these patients for a total of 4 years. And when you look at it, the first slide on the left, you can see that there's a clear separation. If you don't have access to care because of Medicaid expansion or so, you can see that there's as far as the overall survival, it's different, from that standpoint. So the one on the right were the other areas in which there was access, and you can see that between not only Black but other ethnicities, that the curves really don't separate. You can't narrow between them. And because of that, I think it's really important to emphasize access to care as the primary reason for why we really have to emphasize not only screening mammograms to prevent patients from having de novo advanced disease, but also important to make sure that the patients that are diagnosed with these more advanced disease, they have access so that they can be cared for, and an extra year or 2 years with advanced disease, albeit in many cases, it's not curable disease. I always tell my patients with advanced and metastatic disease that we fight for milestones, whether that's another family wedding, whether that's another birthday, whether that's another child to have another baby and a grandson and seeing them. And those are things that we have to look for, and I think it's important to emphasize that. The other thing that I also wanted to focus on is obesity. We all know that. Obesity, in essence, really has risk factors that can play in many different diseases, and we see it very prevalent throughout the development of breast cancer. So from that, a lot of our therapies that we use in both the adjuvant or after you have had definitive therapy, where we leave patients on endocrine therapy for several years, really will attack some of these processes in which we may have lipophilic or estrogen that's going to be remaining within fatty tissue, and that being an independent risk factor, so we prevent the conversion over to estrogen from that standpoint with aromatase inhibitors, and that is something that we use as a standard of care from that. I think it's important to recognize that patients that are postmenopausal, they have a higher incidence of breast cancer based, and it's directly correlated to their overall BMI. And for each 5 kilogram increase, we saw that the relative increase in risk of breast cancer in postmenopausal actually increases from that standpoint. So it's very important for us to recognize that. And so as patients do mature and they hit their postmenopausal marks, when doctors are talking about exercise, physical activity, and getting out there, it's extraordinarily important, because these are the low-hanging fruit. You go for your mammo, you exercise, you eat healthy, we can independently reduce some of these risks from that standpoint. The other thing that's also important to recognize is that this was some very, very interesting data that looked at patients where, traditionally you would think that if you're obese, irrespective of your menopausal status, your incidence of breast cancer is going to be quite similar. But there was some data that was also presented a few years ago that actually subdivided patients, and not to say that it's okay to be obese if you're premenopausal, but we know that there was a direct correlation where there was a lower incidence of breast cancer in these premenopausal patients from that standpoint. Now, the reason for that, we don't really have information for it, but this was a really large retrospective data where they looked at patients, and the patients that had BMIs that were on the lower end from up to about 20 or so, they ended up noticing that there was higher incidence and risk of breast cancer from that standpoint. So from that, there were several different accounts where they looked at each individual BMI cohort and each of the individual BMIs. You can see that the overall incidence and increased risk of breast cancer seemed to correlate to patients that had more along the lines of lower BMIs. And so when you're premenopausal, or say, not to say that I want people to eat whatever they want, but but just be cognizant of that. So I think some of the patients that are severely, BMIs of 15, 16, I think that we have some reasons because a lot of these patients will end up being amenorrheic or they may not have their periods and menses, and that may be the reason for their increased risk from that standpoint long term. But I think it's very important for us to be mindful of that in counseling patients. So these are very similar slides that also demonstrate the age demographics between the age paradigm, and you see all throughout, whether from 25 to 35 to 44, you see very similar findings where we see that there is a discordance between the BMI and the overall risk of breast cancer, dependent upon age. So the other thing that I think is also very important for us to emphasize is that when you're going for your mammogram, and some patients have a hard time, going for mammograms, but I think it's extraordinarily important. But it's important to understand that breast density also is an independent risk factor for breast cancer, and because of that, we need to make sure that patients with dense breasts go for ultrasounds and sonos. From that, we find about 50% of patients that have dense breasts, and if you can imagine, just looking at the image, the one on the right is per se a more fatty deposited breast, and the one on the left is going to be the dense breast, and you can see that it can obscure a lot of lesions, so just mammos alone are not sufficient really to recognize disease, and from the radiology standpoint, there's several different risk stratifications in assessing if the patient does indeed have dense breasts from there. Things that can decrease your breast density would include things like physical activity, low fat, diets, high carbohydrate, and that's what we recognize. As far as some of the patients that have either earlier diseases where we do some hormonal manipulation, we offer tamoxifen, not as an indication for breast density, but it is an indirect side effect of utilizing tamoxifen for risk reduction. Other things just to be mindful of is bone density. So bone density is actually the inverse of what you would traditionally think. So patients with higher bone density generally will have a higher risk of breast cancer. I'm okay. I'm just going to talk with dry mouth. It's okay. No, I'm good. I'm good. It's so fun. Oh, wow. Wow, never had so much service before. I'll take it. Excellent. So I think it's important just for us to be mindful of that as well, because as much as we become in that postmenopausal cohort, we emphasize the importance of going for bone density evaluations, and so these are some things that we look at and just seeing patients to risk adapt them irrespective of what I'm seeing them for. Hormonal replacement therapy, we've all heard about this. These are oral contraceptives, birth controls, and we know that there's an increased incidence of breast cancer associated with that, and because of that, we always want to be somewhat mindful of, this is actually the postmenopausal patient, at the alternative slide. And for patients that are on hormonal replacement therapy, we know that with single agent, that's not an independent risk factor for it. So some patients will ask, after having completed or being postmenopausal, is it okay for using either progestin only or hormonal replacement therapy, and I generally don't have any contraindications for that. But as far as oral contraceptives that are indeed estrogen-based, those indeed can increase the incidence of breast cancer, and we know that after discontinuation, that overall effect is decreased anywhere from about 2 to 5 years, and so it's important for us to be mindful. Pregnancy, nulliparous, or not having been pregnant, is also an independent risk factor from that standpoint. The young lady on the right is the eldest female to have, she had IVF and delivered at the age of 66, which was, she was in the UK, so I don't know. I don't know. I'll wait for the real data regarding that. So we'll see. But you can basically see from that standpoint, what you'll end up seeing is that there's a 20% lower incidence in patients. All right. Wow. What did I do? I've never elicited so much chatter, but it's all good. So I'll take it from here, and what we'll do is just focus on some of the, I know that Dr. Marks had spoken about some of the genetics, and this was a paper that was published last year, and it looked at some of the population-based genes and their overall increase in risk of breast cancer. It looked at about close to 65,000 patients, and looked at some of the more common genes, and I'm sure everyone here has heard of BRCA, ATM, and they've also looked at PALB2 mutations, CHEK2 mutations, and because of that, these are some things just to be mindful of. And what I did want to focus on, because it's very common that we hear about some of these genes and we don't really understand the mechanism in which, why does BRCA actually impart a higher increased incidence of breast cancer? All of these genes are responsible for what we call DNA repair mechanisms. And when you have a mutated gene, it does not generally recognize the cells that have come out and that are faulty. So if you have a mutated gene, what will end up happening is that these patients will be at a higher incidence of having abnormal proteins that proliferate. You end up getting what's called a homologous recombination event, and that generally will increase the incidence of breast cancer. And you can see that there's many different types of proteins that are involved in this, where BRCA1 and BRCA2 is the most prevalent in what we hear about from there. This study basically identified all 4 genes that were basically associated with increased risk, both BRCA1, BRCA2, CHEK2, PALB1, and CDH1 from that standpoint. And they all had a higher incidence. I think I'm running a little behind, so I'm going to try to make sure I get through everything from there. The pathogenic variance between BRCA1 and 2, we all know, has anywhere of an incidence of about 20 to about 80% increased risk of breast cancer. PALB2 is considered to be an intermediate or moderate risk. And when it comes to the BARD, the RAD51Cs, these are increased risk, but they actually have an increased predilection for patients with triple-negative disease from that standpoint, whereas ATM and CHEK2 are more associated with hormone-positive disease. This was also a depiction from that same journal article that basically looked at and showed the overall increased incidence between both BRCA1, BRCA2, and you can see that when you start looking at a mutation such as ATM, where we don't really have strong data to advise patients as far as how best to go about it, but I think it's important to see that in each of those settings, if you do harbor an ATM, BRCA1, BRCA2, CHEK2, or PALB2, these are all mutations that are going to increase your overall lifetime risk of breast cancer from that standpoint. And from there, this is basically saying that when you look at the overall incidence between both finding these variants, both Hispanic and non-Hispanic, they're all considered to be equivalent as far as the incidence of these genes. It's just a matter of the pattern of inheritance. And then from there, the overall lifetime risk of developing a mutation from BRCA is about 50%, both BRCA1 and BRCA2, and PALB2 is a slightly lower risk. That does allow for patients to have mammograms, sonograms, and MRI as a part of their screening. And from there, what I would just recommend is that there's lots of different things that really come into play as far as risk factors for development of breast cancer. Ethnicity, access to care is very important for patients. Obesity, lifestyle changes are things that we have control over, and things that we don't have control over are going to be genetic risk factors. And I encourage everyone to go for their mammo as the best independent way to minimize your risk. If you're on the upper end, so if your T-score is on the opposite end, so not that if you have normal bone density from that standpoint. If you looked at each of the independent scores from the T-scores, the patients that were on the higher end actually had a higher incidence of breast cancer from that standpoint when they were screening at the earlier ages. If the question is...
The earlier age?
Correct.
Like the age of 50 or the age of 50?
So these are going to be patients, generally patients that are under the age of 50 are not going to be screened for bone density.
Yeah, hypothetically.
Correct, yeah.
So the point, should that be one of the to tell people now go get the bone density?
So I think it's important to take into account that you should go for your bone densities. You should use that as a way, but that's not going to be the independent. These are basically retrospective assessments when they look back at that and looking at patients that had higher bone densities, there was a slightly increased risk of breast cancer from there. But I don't think that there's a direct causality if that's the question. Any other questions? Oh boy. I thought I was going to be able to... All right.
On the same thing, bone density, you know, a lot of women here, or maybe not, but me, are taking Prolia. Is that going to hurt now? Because
No.
it increased
So,
your bone.
so generally you do need to take medications like Prolia. I commonly will write for it. And as I mentioned, this was all retrospective data. And that retrospective data was where we looked at the data after seeing patients that were higher end on the bone density score from that standpoint, not the osteoporosis, osteopenia, but patients that had those T-scores, and I don't know if you've seen your actual bone density score. If you look at your T-score and you look at when you start getting like to plus, on the higher end from there, those are the patients that they ended up looking. These was all retrospective data, so it's not to say that if you increase your bone density that you increase your risk. It's basically an observation that when they looked at patients that had higher scores on their bone, on their DEXA scans, that they had a higher incidence of breast cancer. No worries. Anything else for? Sure. All right.
I can relate to the water thing. A few weeks ago, I was at CrimeCon in Orlando. I have a true crime show, if you want to check it out on Hulu, called Missing. And so I was at CrimeCon in this huge auditorium. There's 1,000 people, huge monitors, and they had put out a bottle for me to drink out of, but it was like a thermos, and so here I am, like struggling with it, and I can't get it off, and all these people. Anyway, there was a lot of chuckling in the audience about that. Breast reconstruction is available to all women diagnosed with breast cancer, and there are many types of reconstruction options. Breast reconstruction is about more than physical appearance. That's actually a very good point, because the woman, remember I told you about the woman that contacted us that wanted nerve grafting. You know, I hadn't thought about that. She said, I want this procedure because I have children and I want to be able to hug them and feel them for the rest of my life. And I was like, I never thought about that. And she said, and what if I'm cooking and something happens in the stove? I mean, how do you live without feeling in your chest? And I hadn't thought about that, and that will be apparent in the piece that I do. She had a really good soundbite on that. Many women who have had reconstruction can speak to the fact that it made them feel whole again, which carries tremendous benefits for both mental and emotional health, which we know is such a big part of this. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Thomas Davenport back up to the podium. Dr. Davenport is a board-certified plastic surgeon and partner at New York Plastic Surgical Group, and he will be moderating a panel discussion.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is kind of an exciting time of the program this morning. This is the plastic surgery panel. And as usual, what we've done is we've scoured the country to get three very prominent and well-known plastic surgeons that we didn't have to pay to come here and be a part of our discussion group. So I invite Dr. Barry Douglas, Dr. Matthew Kilgo, and Dr. Noel Natoli. And as part of their introduction, Dr. Douglas earned his medical degree from Wake Forest University. He completed his general surgery and plastic surgery residencies at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York and completed a fellowship in pediatric plastic and maxillofacial surgery at Children's Hospital in Akron with the Northeastern Ohio Medical School. He is a Castle Connolly top doctor and on Newsweek's list of America's best plastic surgeons. He's also an expert artist. He is a concert pianist. He has his very own band, which I think, what's the name? U2, I think is the name. I have really never heard of them, but I'm sure they'll do well in the future. Dr. Kilgo received his MD from University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. After general surgery residency from University of Wisconsin, Dr. Kilgo obtained additional training in general surgery at Gloucestershire Hospitals in the UK. He completed his plastic surgery residency with Indiana University and received his subspecialty training in cancer reconstruction at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. He is also a Castle Connolly top doctor on Newsweek's list of America's best plastic surgeons. Also, Dr. Natoli. She obtained her doctorate in medicine from Upstate Medical University in Syracuse. She went on to complete a combined residency in plastic and reconstructive surgery at Penn State Hershey Medical Center, and then to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia for a microsurgical fellowship in plastic and reconstructive surgery. She also trained at Fox Chase Cancer Center and Chang'an Memorial Hospital in Taiwan, and this as part of her reconstructive training. She's also a Castle Connolly top doctor. Obviously, we should probably pay these people next year because this is a pretty impressive group. I'll put that on the list. Also, if you look down, we have a pen and a pad in front of us. We ask everyone to write down 20 or 30 questions that we can then answer at the end. And we also, this is for valuable prizes. This year, we're giving away Poland spring water to the top 10 questions. And as for the people who won last year, we're still working on that. It's on the way. FedEx is very slow, as you know. It takes a long time. So we're going to start with Dr. Natoli, and she's going to be answering questions on aesthetic flat closure. So Dr. Natoli, what is aesthetic flat closure?
Thanks, Dr. Davenport, for the introduction. It's an alternative to opting out of breast reconstruction at the time of a mastectomy. So it is becoming something that people are talking and chatting about more in groups, and some of our counterparts aren't even aware of it. So it's when a patient has decided, and the most important part of this is it needs to be an informed decision so that they know what their alternatives are, but they've decided at the time of mastectomy to not have a breast reconstruction. And as you know, with breast reconstruction and lack thereof, in patients with significant breast tissue and large amount of a skin envelope, sorry about that, there can be a lot of excess, or what we call dog ears, medially and laterally on the breast. And it's not very aesthetic. So an aesthetic flat closure is different approach, different incisions to make a flat closure across the chest, so that the patient does not need to wear a bra or a prosthetic if they opt not to.
Great, and what are the benefits of aesthetic flat closure, and why do some women choose this post-mastectomy?
So some of the benefits, it really is patient preference, and patients often have a stigma of what the breast and the expectations of having a breast. And a lot of patients who've been diagnosed with breast cancer have decided that I don't want breasts anymore, and this is what brought this on, and I would like to feel proud about the way I feel and look nice and either tattoo across my scars, but I don't want to have, I didn't realize we had the diagram up, but some of the photos you can see what the alternatives are in terms of shape and scar position for an aesthetic flat closure. And so patients have also, often talk with friends who have had, unfortunately, complications with breast reconstruction. A lot of patients who may not be an ideal candidate for an autologous or tissue-based reconstruction do not wish to have breast implants placed. And so this is a way of making them feel good about their reconstruction at the time of without reconstructing the breast and getting rid of that skin excess and making it more aesthetic.
And there's a lot of talk now about a Goldilocks procedure. And what is the difference between a Goldilocks reconstruction and an aesthetic flat closure reconstruction?
Yeah, I think we have another slide on that. So actually, this is a patient of mine who, again, had come to me wanting an aesthetic flat closure, and she was obviously riddled with, symptoms of breast hypertrophy in her large breast. And when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she really just wanted to get rid of her breasts altogether. And so if you advance, these are photos of her probably about 3 or 4 weeks after an aesthetic flat closure, and it's cosmetically more appealing than it would be without the use of a plastic surgeon or someone skilled at this. And then if you can advance again. This is some diagrams to show a Goldilocks procedure. This is basically using what is left behind in a mastectomy. So there is skin flaps, the mastectomy flaps that are left behind, and there is some subcutaneous tissue left behind. And that is not necessarily breast tissue. But in a higher BMI patient, there is more of this tissue. And in a larger breasted patient, there is more of this tissue. So it is an approach by basically using that subcutaneous tissue left behind, and usually a reduction pattern shown. This is from a paper to basically create a small breast mound. It's different and sometimes confused with an aesthetic flat closure, but this is what we refer to for Goldilocks procedure.
Now, is the aesthetic flap closure and Goldilocks procedure covered by insurance?
It is. The simple question simple answer for our non-clinical guests here today is that this should be something that your insurance company covers if you opt for this. And often it does require bringing in a skilled plastic surgeon or someone with knowledge of this procedure base. For our clinical counterparts, we're using complex closure codes, adjacent tissue transfer codes to authorize for these procedures ahead of time.
And what if a patient has either, sure, and what if these patients have an aesthetic flat closure or a Goldilocks reconstruction? Can they also get a more involved reconstruction later?
Yes, so with the Goldilocks procedure, again, we're preserving a significant amount of the skin, so it is not problematic to go back in at a later date if a patient changes their mind and desires a larger breast mound to reconstruct the breast, because a lot of the skin is preserved, albeit a smaller breast that can be created, and tissue expanders can be placed to create a larger breast. Certainly in someone with an aesthetic flat closure, we can put a tissue expander in, but again, that's where the counseling portion of this comes in, because we really want patients to feel confident about their desire to have an aesthetic flat closure, because recreating the breast after is not going to look the same aesthetically as in someone who preserved as much of the skin envelope as possible.
Great. So we're going to save our questions to the end, and we're going to move on to Dr. Douglas, who I have a question for Dr. Douglas on breast reduction and how it affects surveillance. Dr. Douglas, how does breast reduction affect mammograms?
So breast reduction is a very popular procedure that we all do to reduce the size and mass of women's breasts, which restores it to a much more aesthetic conformation. The patients feel better because it alleviates their symptoms of back pain, neck pain. They frequently get rashes under the breast, and it's just a wonderful procedure, tried and true. It works well, the healing is quick. And to answer the question, what was the question again? So, sure. Yes, so in terms of surveillance, a breast reduction removes a large amount of breast tissue. We try to preserve the central pedicle to preserve sensory, but most of the breast tissue that's resected comes out like in a horseshoe type pattern from medial to superior to lateral. And obviously by taking out all that breast tissue, you are decreasing the potential risk of any of that breast tissue being subjected to whatever the multiple genetic situations is that could cause cells to mutate.
Sure. Does breast reduction surgery decrease the risk of breast cancer in patients?
Only insofar as that you are removing breast tissue that could be subjected to whatever the estrogen or circulating hormones that could potentially, and the multiple reasons that can trigger breast cancer. You are reducing the volume of breast tissue. You are not eliminating all the breast tissue in the breast, obviously, because you have to have enough to support and project the breast and shape it so that it looks aesthetic. So yes, you're reducing volume that could possibly be a risk, but you are not eliminating the possibility of the remaining cells from triggering a change.
Now, how would you manage an incidental finding in a breast reconstruction specimen, or sorry, a breast reduction specimen after surgery?
So in the thousands of breast reductions that are done, approximately 2% will have a pathology that's a complete surprise. In other words, most people over, let's say, 40 are getting preoperative mammograms, but in a younger age group, in the 20s or 30s, without any family history, they would not be getting any preoperative mammograms, and you will, in about 2% of the cases, have pathology that could be atypical ductal or atypical lobular hyperplasia, which has by itself about a 30% lifetime risk of malignant degeneration. In those cases where there is what we call a surprise diagnosis, the patient would immediately be sent to a breast surgeon and possibly an oncologist to be appropriately evaluated for their risk factor and as to whether they will proceed with prophylactic mastectomies. But the surveillance is 100% necessary if you get those type of diagnoses.
So just to give us a better feel for this, over your career, this is something you have ever seen?
No,
or have to do
absolutely.
with?
Yeah. In other words, I've recently completed my 1 billionth breast reduction, and there is again, a 2% chance of something happening where you get a surprise diagnosis, even though you have a normal mammogram preoperatively. So yes, the most common ones that we see would be like a lobular carcinoma in situ, or ductal carcinoma in situ, or the atypical ductal or atypical lobular hyperplasia. But all of these are referred immediately to the breast surgeon or the oncologist for evaluation.
So interesting, restoration of sensation in breast reconstruction is one of our newest advances in breast reconstructive surgery. And it's certainly been in the press recently as well. Dr. Kilgo, I just have some questions to you on restoration of sensation after breast reconstruction surgery. But first, having trained in England, can you please comment on the 68-year-old patient who had a child at 68?
I'm not touching that.
Don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you to explain that. No, just trying to get attention, guys. Sorry about that. So, Dr. Kilgo, why do women lose sensation of their breast after mastectomy?
So I think it's helpful, in order to answer that question, to discuss the structural anatomy of the breast and how it's impacted by the different types of mastectomies. So the breast is composed of several layers. We have the outer skin layer and a layer of what we call subcutaneous fat underneath that sort of wraps around or envelopes the breast tissue itself. And the breast tissue sits on top of the muscles of the chest wall, the pectoralis major muscle, which in and of itself sits on top of the rib cage. So the sensory nerves, which are the nerves we're going to talk about, are responsible for relaying information about the external environment to our brain. Things like touch, temperature change, pain, to allow us to assess and react to that. So those nerves start in the muscular layer, and many of them that are important in providing sensation to the nipple and skin sort of permeate the breast tissue on their way to the skin. So they're intimately associated with the breast tissue itself. So during a skin-sparing mastectomy, the breast surgeon will remove the nipple and areola along with the breast tissue, but leave behind the majority of the skin and subcutaneous fat. With a nipple-sparing mastectomy, the nipple and areola are preserved in continuity with that skin, but again, the breast tissue is removed. And because many of those nerves are traversing that breast tissue, by necessity, to do a complete mastectomy, those nerves are also removed. So that takes away sort of the messenger about the external environment to the brain, and that manifests itself as, for lack of a better word, sort of numbness of the skin of the breast as well as the nipple areolar complex.
So in the return of sensation after reconstruction, why would this be important, and why is neurotization important?
What is important, I should mention that not every person has complete loss of sensation after mastectomy. It depends on the anatomy, it depends on the mastectomy type, and there is some spontaneous recovery of sensation over time without restoration surgically, but it's unpredictable and oftentimes unsatisfactory. So it can impact the patient in a number of ways. For instance, when the nerves are transected at the base of the nipple areolar complex, that can lead to loss of erogenous sensation, which can adversely impact feelings of intimacy and body image. A more extreme example would be loss of what we call protective sensation, which is where we're able to detect pain and discomfort, and that puts the reconstructed breast at risk of injury, most commonly from burns. Anecdotally, I haven't seen much of that in my practice, thank goodness, but for instance, a heating pad that's too hot, put on the breast, and you can't tell that it's too hot, can result in a burn. Also, patients who undergo the restoration of sensation surgically tend to report higher satisfaction rates with their reconstruction and better quality of life with regard to their breast reconstruction.
Now, there are several different methods of breast reconstruction. Can this be done with any type of breast reconstruction, or how does that work?
It can. The technique varies to some degree between the type of reconstruction. The one we have most experience with by far is autologous tissue reconstruction, which is where we use your own tissue to reconstruct the breast. And I'll use the DEEP as an example because it's probably the most common one we do. As most of you are probably aware, we take the skin and fat from the lower abdomen and transfer it to the chest along with the blood vessel that supplies that. And we find a blood vessel in the chest area. We sew those together under magnification, usually the operating room microscope, to recreate a breast shape using your own tissue. When we perform what's called a neurotization, we include with that a nerve from the abdomen that normally supplies the skin of the abdomen. And we find a nerve in the chest area that would have supplied the nipple or the skin, but it's been transected during the mastectomy. And we sew those nerves together under the microscope. So the idea is to try to restore sensation by reestablishing that sort of connection. Now, it's very different with an implant, because with an implant, we don't have a donor nerve, right? We're using an implant. So the way that is done is we typically, with the breast surgeon, will find one of the nerves in the chest that supply the nipple, and we dissect that out carefully through the breast tissue, and then we divide it. And then we try to find a nerve at the base of the nipple areolar complex, which is usually very short if we can find it at all. And we use what's called a nerve graft. These days we're using human donor nerve grafts. And we connect the two nerves together to reestablish that connection, to encourage sort of nerve regeneration, with the hope that will restore sensation to the nipple and potentially the breast skin.
Now, this is a newer technology. It's really on the cutting edge. And what is the success rate, and how long does it take to restore feeling to the breast skin?
So actually, autologous tissue reconstruction, we've been doing this a long time with that. The implant neurotization is very, very new. Unfortunately, the data we have, we don't as a paucity of what we would consider high-level evidence. And a lot of the studies, and most of them have to do with autologous tissue, vary considerably in terms of methodology and technique. But again, there are many more studies regarding autologous tissue because we've been doing it for so long. What we can glean from those studies is that there is spontaneous return of sensation to the breast to some degree, but it's unpredictable and often unsatisfactory. Patients who have the neurotization procedure tend to have a more rapid recovery of sensation, and the sensation is of greater magnitude. And then we're very into patient-reported outcomes, and patients who have the neurotization tend to report higher satisfaction with the reconstruction and a better quality of life.
And now, is this procedure covered by medical insurance?
That's a great question. So anecdotally, we've had a reasonable amount of luck getting it covered. There is one insurance carrier that absolutely will not cover it. They consider it experimental. And then just recently, we also had another patient with another carrier be denied authorization. Hopefully with more studies coming out, more prospective randomized trials, we'll be able to make it standard of care and sort of have to force their hand.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. We now have the opportunity, I think we were a little ahead of schedule before, to, I'd like you to answer questions and stump our panel, if you could. So does anybody have any questions? I gotta up my game on the prizes. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Galbert. I didn't have surgery with this group, but I did have the deep flap, and I also had reconstruction with a double mastectomy. My question is, how do you think that it will actually resurface again after having your tissues taken from the abdomen and put into your breast tissue up here? Do you think that the cancer will resurface?
Oh, the cancer?
Yes.
There's number of studies have shown that reconstruction has no impact on cancer recurrence rates or detection of cancer. So that's not something you should be concerned about.
And I'm also 5 years in, and I have no feeling still.
Yeah. Unfortunately, again, the return of sensation can happen. It's unpredictable, and usually you didn't have the neurotization procedure?
No.
Again, it's tough. Maybe you may have some return, but it's hard to say.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Great, thanks. Yes. Next question.
We have one over here. Hi, I just wondered after breast reduction how reliable a mammogram is. Does that affect the results there at all?
Right, so a surveillance mammogram post-operatively, we wait for at least 6 months because it would be too tender during the healing process to get a mammogram. So, but it is essential that they get a postoperative to see that there might be some shadow changes due to the way the pedicle is inset into the way the breast reforms. And that will be going forward their new baseline. But yes, there can be some subtle changes for sure because the breast is totally reshaped and reconfigured.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. So one of them, Cigna, and they tend to deny and I've been told by some of the reps that they actually will deny nerve grafting for any procedure, not just breast reconstruction. And the one we had an issue with was $11.99. Yeah.
Was that your question? Do you have another question?
Hi. I sort of assume that the nerve grafting can only be done at the initial surgery, or is it possible during an exchange or post-reconstruction, 10 years out? Or?
Yeah. That's a great question. We have very little data on implant implant neurotization.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, we couldn't hear over here.
I was asking, I assume that the nerve grafting techniques can only be done at the initial surgery because you're looking for that one end. But because you have to have an exchange after 10 years, I don't know if that's possible down the line.
Yeah, it's a great question. The data on primary neurotization at the time of implant placement, there's 2 studies out there to the best of my knowledge, and one study has 8 patients, one study has 17 patients, so we're talking about very small numbers. There is no data on reoperation. I will tell you though, if you go from an implant-based reconstruction to autologous tissue, okay, because we have a donor nerve, we can find a nerve in the chest area, that is possible to do. I know there are some people out there trying to do, neurotization as a secondary procedure. I think it would be extremely difficult because of all the scarring involved. And you always have to think about risk benefits with surgery. Removing an implant, putting a new implant in, and again, there's no data on it. So at this point in time, I would not be willing to go in and re-explore because I think that the outcomes are uncertain and there's always risk.
More questions?
Hi, how are you? Just have a question concerning if patients need radiation, what kind of reconstruction would you recommend to them?
So the question was, if patients need radiation, what type of reconstruction would you recommend for them? It really just depends on patient preference, and if we know at the time of reconstruction, if they're planning on immediate reconstruction, that they are going to be radiated, sometimes it's best to put a temporary reconstruction in, so like a tissue expander in, just to hold that space, to hold the envelope in that expanded position until the time that they could have their ultimate choice of reconstruction, whether it be autologous or implant-based. Sometimes it is easier in a patient that knows that they want an implant reconstruction and is definitely going to need radiation to try to get with a nipple sparing to direct to implant reconstruction, because we know we don't really like to reoperate on those breasts after. So if we can do a one-stage reconstruction, again, there's a lot of variables with that. The flap has to be in good enough condition to do that, and the patient has to be a candidate for it. But if they are, then sometimes we will rush a direct to implant reconstruction in those patients. But very often in patients that are opting for tissue reconstruction, we talk to them about the benefits of placing a tissue expander first so that they can finish their treatment. Because really, even though the tissue withstands radiation better than an implant, it does cause fibrosis, shrinkage of volume, and asymmetries. So we're better off usually letting those patients receive their treatment unhindered by the reconstruction, and then continue with the reconstructive process at a later stage.
We have another question over here.
Hello. Is there any research on after breast reduction if there's a lower incidence of recurrence of breast cancer?
Are you a lower incidence of breast cancer? I'm a little confused.
If someone had breast cancer, then they got a breast
Okay,
reduction.
so you're doing a breast reduction in the course of like the lumpectomy.
Yes.
Right, so all of breast reconstruction has no increased incidence of stimulating a cancer recurrence. I mean, is it possible? Of course it is. But by definition, the actual procedure itself should not have any increased risk.
I was just thinking as a layperson, perhaps even removing more tissue might make you better off. Do you know what I mean?
Well, then you get closer to the mastectomy. So in other words, when you're designing the breast reduction, it's a complicated decision based on your planning and what the patient wants. Do they want to be more full-figured because they've been used to seeing a large breast for their whole life? You want to eliminate and alleviate their symptoms. On the other hand, you want an aesthetic result. So yes, you could take off more and more tissue and decrease the risk of the relative remaining breast tissue, but then it could distort the breast, and then they say, I'm too flat now.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
But I think just to add on to what Dr. Douglas said, in general, it is risk reducing, right? So you're reducing the volume, you're reducing the amount of tissue. So you are correct in saying that it is risk reduction with reduction surgery.
Okay. Any final questions?
I'll be here.
Okay.
Hi, last November I had a double mastectomy for breast cancer, aesthetic flat closure. I'm very happy with being flat, and I'm very appreciative to hear you speak about it. I'd like to see it more in doctors' offices. I don't feel that it is given as an option as much as it should be. My question to you is, now that I am flat, what are some of the tests, since I can't have a mammogram, I have invasive lobular in situ with a few tumors. So what would I do to put myself at ease for tests going forward to know that maybe it hasn't spread? What would I look for, or what type of tests could be done?
So with any mastectomy procedure, whether the patient has autologous reconstruction or no reconstruction, in your case, again, self-breast exam is something that's important. I take care of a lot of transgender patients, and it's important that they're not going to get mammograms after, but ultrasounds can be useful if something is detected and palpated. So self-exam is still important. And then, working with your oncologist and primary care doctor who work with you to see if any further testing is indicated at that point, whether it be MRI or other imaging, for sure.
We have time for one more question. Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Next on the agenda, we will be discussing the importance of physical therapy before and after surgery. I'd like to introduce physical therapist Diana Jaden, the clinical director of Full Circle Physical Therapy and IV Rehab.
Thank you to Lisa, Janine, and the staff at New York Plastic Surgical Group for this incredible invite. Words can't describe how honored I am to be standing here in front of you today, as this breast cancer summit has been one of my favorite to attend for the past 10 years. I have been and continue to be equally honored to treat those diagnosed with breast cancer for 20 years, with my mission making physical therapy treatment part of every patient's plan of care. Treating this population exclusively has allowed me to fully understand and see the magnitude that treating as a team alongside surgeons, oncologists, not only benefits the patient, but improves their quality of life and overall outcome. And we are so lucky to have this mentality here on Long Island. I hope my presentation today leaves you with a deeper understanding of the role physical therapy can play. In doing so, I am about to share with you the tale of two women, one who had physical therapy upon her diagnosis and the other who did not. Please keep in mind this is a story of two of our patients, but we do see patients who struggle more and those who struggle less. Jan and Rachel are 50 years old, both married and have teenage children. They work full-time as teachers in elementary schools. Diagnosed in January with stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma, ER/PR positive, HER2 negative. Jan underwent a bilateral mastectomy, deep flap reconstruction with sentinel node dissection. Rachel had a left lumpectomy with sentinel node dissection, right mastopexy or lift. They both underwent chemotherapy, radiation, and will follow with endocrine therapy. Upon diagnosis, Jan was referred for a pre-surgical evaluation. This evaluation would empower her with information including sleeping and sitting positioning to promote healing and reduce the likelihood of complications. It discussed post-surgical expectations and, importantly, setting realistic expectations. It addressed pre-surgical and pre-existing musculoskeletal problems and how they might impact recovery. We took circumferential baseline measurements to assess for post-surgical edema throughout the upper extremity. Educate about lymphedema as needed, and then start physical therapy or provide with a home exercise program if indicated. Rachel, we're calling the internet searcher. She searches online for what to expect after surgery, reads about both positive and negative outcomes without understanding some women are in different situations than she. And what we talk about daily with patients, they have different surgeons, as we have incredible surgeons here on Long Island. Gets calls from friends who know someone who had breast cancer and is overwhelmed with contraindicating information regarding how to manage at home. She also has decreased left shoulder range of motion, but she does not realize it as she has been compensating. And she does expect to return to normal range of motion after surgery. 3 weeks post-operative, they notice post-surgical swelling is still present. Jan then calls her surgeon to report possible swelling and requests a script for physical therapy. She sees her physical therapist for manual lymphatic drainage and bandaging if needed. She's instructed in self-manual lymphatic drainage, given gentle range of motion and postural exercises if cleared by the surgeon, educated about different compression bras, garments, and binders if cleared by the surgeon as well, and is measured for a garment if needed. Rachel, on the other hand, might not contact the office or possibly wait until her next post-operative visit. Her arm could become more swollen as she would not be educated about activities that could trigger more swelling. She would not be educated about how to manage the swelling, and anxiousness could possibly increase about what could happen during the recovery. 4 to 6 weeks post-operative, Jan is referred back to physical therapy, and her plan of care includes reassessing range of motion, strength, pain, flexibility as compared to pre-surgical baseline, performing manual techniques and guided exercises to restore range of motion, tissue mobility, flexibility, strength, and cardiovascular endurance. Addressing tissue restrictions to muscles directly impacted by breast surgery, which is a very big difference from the general physical therapy population. And educate on safe techniques to return to everyday activities. Also, communicate with surgeons and oncologists regarding progress or concerns as needed. Rachel has not been referred to physical therapy, and she begins to experience tightness and pain, believes it is normal after surgery, especially because it is so soon. She feels grateful to be alive and does not want to complain to her surgeon about symptoms. She downplays the pain, discomfort, and limitations in function. She is cleared to start moving more and getting back to activities. She finds herself unable to or struggling with the ability to do household activities due to pain and stiffness. And she pushes through it as the typical mentality might be, no pain or stiffness, no gain. They both start chemotherapy. Jan is able to prevent severe conditioning due to modified exercises. She gets to therapy for manual treatments, and she really is typically surprised about how much she can do, which is really something that we find daily with so many of our patients. She receives emotional support from the PT and other women in the clinic, collects phone numbers with others with whom to keep in contact. Rachel, on the other hand, has supportive friends and family, but does not feel like anyone understands what she is going through. She does not want to join a support group, has few opportunities to meet others in her situation, and notices a significant decrease in her energy and endurance. They both start radiation therapy. Jan regains the range of motion needed and has been educated about the typical expectation in upper extremity mobility, which we all know is up over the head in this position. She understands if certain exercises and activities should be modified. She performs her self-MLD and is able to comfortably maintain her upper extremity position due to radiation, due to the increased range of motion achieved in PT. She continues with her home exercise program modified by the PT if needed, and continues with manual treatment to maintain her mobility. Rachel has no monitoring of her range of motion and flexibility, no education about range of motion, flexibility, or MLD exercises, has increased pain during radiation due to decreased range of motion, increased stiffness and decreased range of motion as radiation progresses, and she believes that it is expected that motion will improve after radiation. And we find that radiation can be challenging in many different ways. Regaining range of motion really is one piece, but tissue mobility after surgery with manual techniques, progressing with strengthening exercises to build the endurance of the lymphatic system, and patient education about what to expect after radiation ends is what we see yields the best functional results. At the end of treatment, Jan slowly returns to normal activities with minimal to no pain. She has support group, including women and men in similar situations, is able to mentally be present at home, returns to work, enjoys social situations and gatherings, and feels she has control of her symptoms and knowledge of how to handle issues that arise. Rachel, on the other hand, wishes she were exercising like she once was, but she is very nervous to return. She mentions pain and decreased quality of life on her surgical follow-up. She finally is referred to PT with decreased range of motion, strength, endurance, and pain. There are no baseline assessments for comparison and believes limited range of motion is due to the surgery, not pre-existing, as if she would have known if she had come to a pre-surgical evaluation from the beginning. So why physical therapy? Physical restoration, emotional support, team approach. Restoring range of motion, flexibility, tissue mobility, strength, and guided exercise allows for a safe progression back to activity. It helps decrease the risk of lymphedema, which is really one of the biggest fears of many of our patients. It decreases flare-ups or development of orthopedic issues such as shoulder or neck problems. And seeing patients early after surgery truly is key. We understand that after surgery, patients experience musculoskeletal pain throughout many different groups. They could experience nerve pain that presents as hypersensitivity throughout the chest, where a light shirt touching the skin could be dreadful. But then we have the opportunity to teach them different ways to desensitize the area. We expect patients to have quick jolts of pain throughout the breast 3 to 5 weeks post-surgery. We can reassure them that this is typically normal and it will pass. It becomes very obvious when a patient is running into a problem or not progressing like expected, and we can easily reach out to the surgeon's office for earlier intervention. Emotional support. By providing guidance and support through education and empowerment about taking control over the diagnosis. By delivering a community of support that ranges from patient advocates, support groups, coalitions, financial assistance, bra and wig boutiques, the sharing of tips and ways to manage chemo and radiation challenges, and so many more. By being informed that the goal after treatment and surgery involves living with very few limitations in function and quality of life, and we feel very, very strongly about that message. We have, when early physical therapy treatment, sometimes, well, most of the time, will decrease this vicious cycle of pain from occurring. And what we see happen here is that pain leads to decreased movement, which typically is due to fear of movement. And patients don't know if they should be moving, if they should be feeling a stretch, what they should be experiencing, so they can then have decreased activity, which could potentially lead to weight gain and depression. And we are here to prevent or break this cycle with education and treatment to make them move better. Taking a team approach. By providing a team approach involves communication between the treating physicians and physical therapists, and we see them post-operatively 2 to 3 times a week. This allows for a second set of eyes on surgical incisions and identifying if a patient is not progressing as expected. Patients have lots of questions, and we can help guide them to the appropriate physician, support service, or resource. And this decreases the emotional burden on the patient who would have traditionally tried to research and call on his or her own, and it helps the physician as well. And we have such great communication with Bobby, Jessica, Kristen, Olga, and Stephen, Dr. Kilgo, Adana, and Davenport's PAs, as well as Dr. Karanetz herself, and the patients really love this team approach. It takes a village to treat this population. Some of the providers include physical therapists, breast surgeons, oncologists, radiation oncologists, plastic surgeons, social workers, psychotherapists, nutritionists, acupuncturists, massage therapists. All of these providers should be included. So in summary, physical therapy is recommended pre and post surgery. Physical therapy is important pre-surgically to address pre-existing muscle imbalances, strength deficits, orthopedic conditions, and to provide education. Physical therapy is important post-surgically to restore range of motion, flexibility, tissue mobility, and strength. And a team approach completes the plan of care needed for optimal recovery. And knowledge and education empowers patients to take control over their recovery. These are some of the references I use. These are the most important ones. Thank you very much. I'm always happy to answer any questions, emails, phone calls. Happy to be part of the plan. Thank you. Sure. Any questions?
Hi. If you had some lymph nodes removed and, in the beginning of your journey, you had the fear of the lymphedema, but does that get better through time? Like, is there a certain amount of time it gets better?
Well, lymphedema, unfortunately, is a chronic condition. I think some people have different amounts of lymphedema. There's different stages of lymphedema. It can manage.
I'm saying if you don't have it.
If you don't have it,
Yeah.
could you
the
get it?
The risk of getting it.
The risk of getting it, that's a kind of a challenging question, just that everybody's body's different and their body has adapted differently. It could be a risk, it could not. It depends on a lot of different factors, but regaining range of motion, having full range of motion, is a very, very important piece to that. Because when your motion is limited, it really does increase congestion to the area. And to stay strong, to strength train is very important as well. The lymphedema is a tricky piece because everybody is in different scenarios.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
I don't.
We have a question right here. Hi. For the
I don't
pre-surgical
know where I am now.
evaluation, do they come to you?
Yes. Patients come to us. Sometimes they come just one visit. It's a very overwhelming time. Sometimes they come for several visits to regain their strength and motion. It's become a common practice in our office. And it is covered under insurance. That's the other piece.
We have 2 more questions over here.
Actually, it's not a question, it's just a comment. So I do recommend, after your procedure that you do the full circle physical therapy. I did go through it, and trust me, I went from holding my arm to like this, to now I can hold my arm all the way up. So I do recommend that you actually do it. It's a lot of physical support, it's a lot of emotional support, and I did. So I really recommend you guys going. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, it's not a question. My name is Marissa Rizzi. I'm a nurse practitioner at Bethpage Catholic Health Services. I've seen some of my patients over here, actually. Now, regarding lymphedema, I've been doing lymphedema. I think I refer some of my patients to you, Diana. Now, regarding lymphedema, actually, we published an article about lymphedema therapy. And in my office, we do the LDEX. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
So LDEX is a machine. And what I usually do is, before the patient goes for surgery, the breast surgeon hands me over the patient and I do a baseline measurement so that I know what is the normal fluid volume in the patient's body. And then after a few weeks after surgery, patient comes back to me, and I completely monitor the patients. The first 3 years after surgery, breast surgery, is the first 3 years of highest incidence of developing lymphedema. And it's proven in my article and with Dr. Kaufman before. The more lymph nodes taken out from the patients, the highest risk the patients will develop lymphedema, 5 and more. So the first 3 years is the highest incidence of developing lymphedema with more lymph nodes removed. So what I usually do is the first 3 years, I monitor the patients closely every 3 months for the first 3 years, so that at the first sign of lymphedema, such as swelling, redness, heaviness, or discomfort, I usually turn over the patients to lymphedema clinic, and usually they manage it. And then after 3 years, I usually monitor the patients every 6 months. And then 5 years post-surgery, the risk of lymphedema goes down. Some patients still do develop lymphedema, some don't. So, but I still continue monitoring the patients, such as the signs and symptoms, and evaluate them as they come and see me in my office. Now, recently we have some issues with LDEX. Not all the insurances approve it, which, basically the Medicare is the #1 insurance that, doesn't want to pay. So my question is, as a lymphedema specialist, what is your intake about the new machines, such as the FlexiTouch? Because some of my patients are using that at home as a way of continuing the management of prevention of lymphedema. I have some of my patients that, the feedback to me was great, and they are very happy with it. And Medicare approves that. So the FlexiTouch is a machine that the patient usually uses at home. I think one of the company here is involved with that. I see some of them already, and because I attended some of the seminar with them. And I just want you to elaborate about FlexiTouch, because most of breast cancer patients are here.
I do think it's a great adjunct to therapy. I do really strongly believe that patients should be coming to physical therapy first to get manual hands-on treatment. And that's really where my specialty is, so I'm not too familiar more than that. But people are continuing with it at home, and I think it's a wonderful adjunct to therapy. And it's been very helpful to have that covered by insurance and to be able to continue the care for this condition that is chronic and can be very challenging to people.
We have one more question over here. Hi, my name is Cynthia. We want to know a little bit more about neuropathy, because we have a couple of girls here who are suffering with that.
Neuropathy does tend to be a very challenging condition. What we do to address that is we work soft tissue, we do a lot of stretching, work on the balance. I know there's different medications out there for that. We have a couple of different things we do in our office. It still does and probably will continue to always be one of the more challenging conditions, but I think there's different tools and techniques to help that be managed a bit better.
One last question. It's not so much a question as a comment for the end. I'm Dr. Karen, and I just recently incorporated IV rehab for my patients, and I just wanted to say I've seen such a positive impact it has on so many patients' lives, their quality of life, whether you undergo lumpectomy, implant-based autologous reconstruction. So I'm so glad you guys are here on Long Island, and I just encourage our patients who are here who have undergone surgery, if you still have limitations or any issues, they're wonderful therapists. They're very caring, kind, and compassionate, and they truly are able to help patients improve range of motions and sometimes realize some limitations that they may not even know they have. So, thank you.
Thank you.
It really is amazing. For anybody who's had PT, you know how amazing it is. I now would like to introduce Dr. Vera of New York Plastic Surgical Group.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was a great talk, and I love that we have ways we can continue to empower patients during their recovery. I'm Haritha Vera Machineni. I'm a board-certified plastic surgeon at New York Plastic Surgical Group. For me, the name change has been so easy. I just think, I love New York Plastic Surgical Group. Easy. And I'm so honored to introduce our next speaker, my patient, Amy Henris, who took control of her health with her breast cancer diagnosis. Amy is a 9th grade biology teacher, a wife, and a mother. And like many of you, her story started with notification of some suspicious findings on her mammogram. 6 months later, after a biopsy result, we learned that she had stage 0 breast cancer, but with an 87% chance of becoming invasive. She then underwent a bilateral mastectomy, expertly performed by my colleague and good friend, Dr. Jenna Deitch of Catholic Health, and bilateral breast reconstruction by myself. Because of Amy's history, she took a test for genetics and learned that she was BRCA1 gene positive. She then went on to have a hysterectomy as well as a pancreatic scan. She also completely changed her lifestyle for the better, and what inspires me about Amy is that she took a very scary and frightening experience, and she turned it into one that positively impacted her to make her health a priority. So please join me in welcoming Amy Henris.
All right, clap it up, Dr. Vera. Can you hear me? Oh. Okay. All right, so this is a lot harder than I thought. Anyway, first of all, thank you, Dr. Vera, for introducing me, and thank you for everyone coming. I honestly did not think it would be this many people. I probably would have said no. When Dr. Vera's office contacted me to see if I would speak today, I honestly said, why me, right? Oh, so many people here went through chemo, radiation. That's not what I went through. Maybe it's because I'm a success story. Maybe it's because I have a loud voice. My husband will attest to that one. Or maybe it's just because I'm not the typical patient, or maybe I am. I went back and forth deciding what to share with you today, the best way to convey my journey. Do I give you an assessment at the end of the day like I do my kids? But what I would like to share is a little bit about myself, give a few shout outs to my girlfriends and my husband and my kids, and hopefully it's a little bit of an inspiration. So here it goes. Oh wait, yeah, there, yep, okay, good. I'm 51 years old, I have 2 boys, 22, 18, just celebrated my 29th wedding anniversary to my best male friend, my husband in the back. I teach at a high school, 9th grade biology here in Long Island. I'm not telling you where. But this is my second career. My first career, I was an andrologist. It's a sperm specialist. That's a whole nother speech and a whole nother venue. So back in 2020, Dr. Ann Green, who I just found out is not here, She can be a little scary at times, so I hope someone has this videotaped and they tell her that. But she honestly saved my life. So I went to St. Catherine's. She was concerned about a suspicious area, told me to go back in 6 months. Life got in the way, right? Who wants to go to a doctor, really? Like, we just don't want to go there. So with my help, my best friend and my husband, they sent me back, and she said, all right, you're going to go see Dr. Janet Deitch. So I did, after she pushed me and kind of threatened me a little bit, just saying. So I went, I thought it was all hogwash, and did genetic testing, and Dr. Deitch called me and said I was BRCA1 positive. So, yeah, a little scary. Hold on, everything's color-coded. So she was very respectfully insistent that I follow through, so I do thank her for that, and she'll always be a part of my life. So in August of 2020, she told me that, Dr. Deitch told me that really my only option was a bilateral mastectomy. And I think my reaction on the phone, and Dr. Deitch is in the back, and she can probably remember, I said, oh, okay, okay, okay. So I said, I'll have to call you back. How do you process something like that? I just don't think you don't. I think it takes time and it takes a support system. And I think everyone that's gone through any kind of breast cancer or scares or any change to their health whatsoever remembers the moment that they hear that news. So I remember my husband and oldest son were both working. My brother-in-law just went biking with my younger son, who's now a college student. So I felt so alone. So I called my husband, told him what was going on, hung up, and ran right next door to my best friend. So yes, she lives next door. And she'll say every minute she doesn't like it. She loves every second. I don't get through much life without her. Even the outfit I had today, she had to go shopping and pick it out. This does not happen. So I remember how blatantly I explained it to my older son. Mom, what's the matter? Oh, I'm having my boobs cut off. Not a big deal. How do you respond to that? So obviously I didn't process it at the time. So fast forward to a month, September 2020, Dr. Vera Machinini, who is, I know there's a lot of people in the practice. She's the best one there. Sorry, guys. So she was the surgeon that I did choose. She did a bilateral mastectomy. April of 21, I had a total hysterectomy by Dr. John Wagner. And July of 21, had my first reconstruction. And then this year, I just had my second reconstruction. My world went from normal boobs and monthly cramps to a boob job and menopause. Woohoo! What a blast it was. But I honestly feel like one of the lucky ones. I totally got ahead of it. It's all in the past. So if we keep talking about what happened and not what you want, then I wouldn't have seen all the great things to come over the last couple of years. All right, I have to keep it humorous or else you're gonna see tears, so we're just gonna have to keep going. All right. So my husband, Todd, there he is, was more than just there for me. He was my crutch. The first Christmas after all the surgeries, just gift after gift after gift. I'm like, what is going on? And he's like, you had a hell of a year. And I was like, woo! And all the tears just came right down. Then I have my three besties. They were my glue. Alicia, she's the best advice giver and the best hugger ever. Wendy, who laughs at all my stupid jokes and actually makes me feel funny, like I am funny, but I'm really not. Normally my students laugh a lot more because they're pliable. And then there's Ellen, who kind of is my female everything. I purposely put that up there to make her look bad. So if everyone can please take a look at the person on top, that would be Ellen right in the back. She shows me up with fashion every day, so I just knocked her down a peg. There we go. But they really are the most amazing people. There's something to be said about your girlfriends. Anytime you need something, they're there. Without my family, my boys, my husband, would have been a lot harder. But the physical transformation was obvious. The constant reminders, every time you look in the mirror, you feel good, then you look in the mirror, you're like, Oh yeah, that happened. But I did discover resilience that I never had. After feeling sorry for myself, I started putting me first more than I used to. I'm still working on that one. Exercising, eating healthier. I went back to Dr. Vera several months after one of my many checks, and it's like, wow, you lost weight. I was like, yeah, I did. But I feel like I've been on a roller coaster with mixed emotions, but I really feel like one of the lucky ones. I got a chance to be proactive and embrace this new version of myself. So I'm choosing to be the best me that I can. Here we go. I got to enjoy my oldest son's graduation from college. So if there's any principals out there, he's looking for a math job. So not only did I get to see his graduation, but my youngest son, he graduated high school. He's going to a PA school right now, both college athletes, really, really proud of that. And another proud memory that I'll take with me forever. I may not have had these memories if I didn't have Dr. Vera, I didn't have Christy Summis, I didn't have Dr. Deitch, Dr. Green, Deanna. So everyone really made such an impact in my life. So where is this going? The moments that I experienced and the moments that I have going forward just makes me who I am today. Changing my lifestyle wasn't the easiest thing to do. My husband, my friends, pillars of my support system, they encouraged me every step of the way. Family, friends, believe it or not, this journey has strengthened all my relationships. I guess I always knew that I was loved, but you never realized how loved you were, right? Until people are hugging you and giving you gifts all the time. Yeah. So being a teacher of 9th grade kids, I hear so many stories and the pressures that they go through about being accepted by a friend group and how many likes they got and how much digital validation holds. Oh, I've got 400 likes. Yeah, but who's going to be there when you have your mastectomy? Who's going to be there because you got a thumbs up? Like, enough. Sorry. So there's another picture. So going through my life, altering journey over the last couple of years, I know that my life is measured by the moments I've shared and will continue to share, not by how many likes I have or how many attaboys or attagirls you get. So I have what I need. The importance of my doctors and medical staff, Dr. Green, Dr. Vera Machinini, again, best one there, Christy Summis, Dr. Deitch, and all the amazing nurses got me through so I could talk to you today. I'll be forever grateful. However, I owe so much more to my husband, my 2 boys, and my best friends. They were my heroes through it all. Riding on this roller coaster has taught me the strength and beauty can coexist even inside your scars. And the sharing of my story will hopefully uplift the spirits of others. Being proactive and loving yourself is the best advice I can give anyone. Thank you.
Next, we have our guest of honor and keynote speaker, Joy Bauer. Joy is one of the nation's leading health authorities. She is the nutrition and healthy lifestyle expert for the Today Show and the host of NBC's Health and Happiness. Joy is a #1 New York Times bestselling author with 14 bestsellers to her credit. She has served as the official nutritionist for the New York City Ballet for more than a decade and maintains joybauer.com, a popular online destination for cutting-edge health information and thousands of delicious recipes. Any of those good for working moms? Totally. Excellent. Passionate about delivering scientifically sound, realistic information to millions of Americans, Joy has received countless awards, including the National Media Excellence Award from 2 of the most esteemed organizations, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American Society of Nutrition Science. Joy was honored with 2 Taste Awards in 2022, a distinction often described as the Oscars of food, fashion, and lifestyle media, and 6 more nominations in 2023. Please welcome Joy to the podium.
Thank you.
you so much. Hi, everyone. First, let me say that it is a huge honor to be your first keynote speaker who hasn't personally had a diagnosis of breast cancer.
On behalf of the New York Plastic Surgical Group, our partners and all of our attendees really, really are appreciative and want to give you this Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure. Oh, I love it. Thank you. I'm going to step aside and
Congratulations, that was wonderful. Thank you. To each of our speakers, we could not be more appreciative of your participation in the summit today. It was such a great morning, wasn't it? It was wonderful. In addition, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to each of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. I specifically would like to thank Allergan for their generosity as our presenting sponsor. Thank you to the pink ribbon sponsors, Galderma, New York Cancer and Blood Specialists, and Pure Mammography. Once again, if you didn't have your questions answered, you can certainly contact the team here. They'll be sure to get that answered for you, or the survey will be coming in your email as well. On behalf of myself and New York Plastic Surgical, we hope that you enjoyed the morning, and we'll see you next year. Have a great rest of the day.